are we doing in the Hollywood Hills when we're going to do a show on the greatest running back in the history of the National Football League? Jim Brown broke records. No, he created records, and he set standards for everyone that was to follow. He went out on top. He was the most valuable player in the league. He decided that was just one of his goals. He created a new challenge for himself. He became a movie actor. He was put in unique roles and in situations where no other black had ever been permitted before. Jim Brown came to this city because this is where he worked. He stayed here because this is his home, and he fell in love with Los Angeles. Swinton Sweet Sue Brown floated in and out of his son's life like a memory. But young Jimmy didn't care. He had 3 generations of women raising him on St. Simon's Island in South Georgia, and he never hurt for love. What Swinton missed was not merely the growth of a boy, but the flowering of a champion, a revolutionary, a warrior. Not to mention one of football's unrivaled powers and personalities to ever storm an end zone. The heat today is unbearable. Blacks and whites are not side by side, but head to head in racial friction sparking deadly riots that have mutilated the city of Los Angeles. Jim Brown, the activist who cools tempers in the race-torn trenches of LA, is light years away from Jim Brown, the Manhasset High letterman who moved to Great Neck, New York as an 8-year-old with his mother, a maid in that almost pure white upper-crust neighborhood of Long Island. Brown was one of only a handful of blacks at Manhasset, but didn't feel the sting of discrimination on or off the playing field where he starred in 5 varsity sports. That would come later. By his senior year, he averaged 38 points a game on the basketball court and 15 yards on the gridiron where he was all-state. When did you begin to understand that athletics was going to be so important in your life?
Well, I can't quite say I understood it was going to be very important in my life. I was always an athlete from a little boy. You know, we used to roll tires, we used to jump off of a box in the swimming hole, we used to climb trees, we used to have races. So I knew I was a pretty good athlete at that time, not formally, but as I went into junior high school, I realized I could play different sports. And of course, in high school, I played about 5 sports. So I would say it was a thing that I possessed all my life.
How did you end up at Syracuse University? You were a great high school football player, but how was Syracuse decided upon?
Well, I was at Manhasset High School, and I ran into, of course, some fantastic people there. It was a great school. Had a lot of good teachers, great coaches. In fact, my head coach, Ed Walsh, has been the greatest man I've ever known in my life. And there was a lawyer by the name of Kenny Malloy. He's now Judge Malloy on Long Island. And he decided he wanted me to go to Syracuse, but Syracuse didn't want me. So the people in Manhasset decided, without my knowing it, to raise the money, send me to Syracuse, and then hope that I'd win a scholarship.
But once on the freshman squad in 1953, there was not only no scholarship, but no other blacks, and almost no chance to play. And that almost broke him. Injuries forced coach Ben Schwartzwalder to bump Jim from 5th string to starting halfback during his sophomore season. All he needed was some open air to prove himself, and he found it in a game against Cornell, clocking 150 yards with a 54-yard touchdown. That locked him in as a starter for the rest of his college stay. Brown ran, played defense, kicked, and averaged over 6 yards a carry by his senior year. The year Syracuse went 7-1, and then, despite Brown's 3 touchdowns and 132 yards, lost in the Cotton Bowl, the same year Jim Brown went All-American. When his time was up at Syracuse, Brown carried the ball 361 times for 2,091 yards and added 25 touchdowns as an Orangeman, good enough to make him one of the top 5 athletes in the last 25 years of NCAA history. Paul Brown, Cleveland's former owner, GM, coach, and namesake, said when you got a big gun, why not fire it as often as possible?
When we drafted him, I thought he was going to be a great back. It turns out that, for my money, he's the greatest running back of all time.
So his 1957 #1 draft pick aimed and unloaded a National Football League rushing title and twisted the club's limp 5-7 record around to 9-2, nailing the Eastern Conference title in his rookie season. The faster pro game suited Brown just fine, and as the pulse of Cleveland's offense, Brown thought he had died and gone to football heaven. This is the sport with an attitude, where the bad guys pile on until you stop breathing and start bleeding. But Brown was godlike, at least on the field. He took his time from the tackle to the huddle, whether he needed to or not, letting them all think that they had their man. He loved knowing linemen might snap his bones, but never his spirit. He loved playing in the lead of the other locker room's pregame strategy show, and then again in their postmortem. But there was also fear and pressure, stifling pressure from hungry fans and team dependents. And of course, it was America in the 50s, and that meant one thing. When you were breaking in pro football, was there racism in pro football?
Well, it was racism in America, and whatever's in America is going to be in football or any other sport. Absolutely. You know, at that time, you know, we were in the late 50s, and America was not the same America as it is today. So we had to endure, you know, stack in one position. You know, they said blacks couldn't play quarterback and center and linebacker and a lot of these things that had to do with your mental capacity. But overall, it wasn't as bad, I think, as certain aspects of society, because we were football players and they wanted to win. So it was like they were pioneers in breaking down some of the barriers. But yes, there was a certain amount of racism.
And what happened, my observation is, that you were maybe one of the first guys to say, no, I don't have to put up with this. Is that how it happened?
Well, I don't know if I was one of the first guys. Like I said, you know, you had pioneers before me, you know, people that had to play in professional sports under terrible circumstances, and, you know, sometimes they had to keep their mouth closed to advance the sport.
Yes.
I came in after that, and I refused to ever accept second-class citizenship, which caused you a lot of problems because you're considered a good black person when you don't rock the boat. Or you're a troublemaker when you rock the boat, when you want to be equal. And it was always perplexing to me to have a person expect me to be very strong and tenacious on the field and then be very docile off the field. So I would always say, if you want this on the field, well, that's who I am. So you have to deal with it off the field.
Jim Brown didn't talk much. He didn't want to. He let his field work do all the talking for him. But when it came to quotas and double standards for blacks, he broke his silence. It was the bloom of civil rights sentiment, and they called him a militant, a malcontent, a locker room lawyer. But Brown propped that image up against his superstar rushing, which boosted Cleveland to a 27-0 romp over Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts for the 1964 NFL championship. He may have rubbed against the grain of the establishment, but Brown pocketed $65,000 a year, one of the fattest NFL paychecks in the mid-60s. After 9 years without missing a game and a career 12,312 yards, a record intact for 22 years until Chicago's Walter Payton finally smashed it with the help of 18 more games, Brown left Cleveland's Municipal Stadium in the sport of football as the NFL MVP in 1965 at an unripe 29 years of age. Even with his unbeatable 5.2 yards per carry and 104.3 yards per game average, Brown wasn't going to be one of those players who became a slave to the sport and the spotlight. He chose retirement before it claimed him. And besides, the times were changing. Hollywood had just beckoned him with a 3-year movie deal.
I had 9 years under my belt, and I never missed a game. We'd won the championship once and played for it 3 times. I was mentally exhausted. I did not want any more. Also, I wanted to go out on top and to pursue other things. And I also knew that timing is it's an important factor. So it seemed logical to me that it was the right time to leave. I mean, if I was a football player that thought that that's all I could do, or I just loved the game so much, I'd have hung around, limped around, begged for some more money, and get put out the game. I didn't want to get put out the game. I wanted to leave the game on my own terms so that when people say how many more years you can play, I could say indefinitely.
You might remember him as an officer-turned-cowboy in Rio Conchos, or as his controversial love scene with Raquel Welch in 100 Rifles, the first with a black man and a white woman in American movies. But you can't forget his lone wolf character alongside Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson, and Donald Sutherland in The Dirty Dozen, the most popular movie he ever starred in.
What were your highlights in the movie industry?
I had a lot of them, you know, because I went in, broke down a lot of taboos. You know, I had a movie called 100 Rifles, wherein it was financed because of my name. Burt Reynolds was the third star, Raquel Welch was the second. It was the first major love scene on American screen between a white woman and a big black guy. And America thought that was really something else. And it was fun for me because it was almost laughable, you know, because it was just a matter of me kissing her and holding her in my arms, which I thought that, my God, that's so far behind my real life, you know, because I'd kissed and held a lot of women of all colors and races.
The money wasn't bad, but the real Hollywood allure for Brown was the chance to smash taboos and infiltrate traditional white roles. But by the 70s, the barriers sprung back up. The market for blacks dissolved and Jim Brown went out of style. And as far as he was concerned, the NFL and Hollywood were two names for the same bigot.
Thank you, Mr. Major, sir. I really do thank you for that.
It's not unusual to still see Jim Brown on television today, but now he rushes to a different goal, boosting black business, supporting programs for poor and imprisoned blacks, and even dousing the fury within his race that has raged wild in the gangland of L.A. Face to face with inner city kids, he isn't the great Cleveland running back or the Hollywood tough guy, but just a man who can still command an audience.
What that brother still got in his mind? Slob-ass snicker? You know what I'm saying?
Hey, Jim.
I know you can.
Hey,
I know that's enough. I know that, man. I know that. This is a young brother, right?
You want to see me, homie? What's up? You want to go down there, man? You want to see me?
What happened? But the point is that I'm trying to make a change in my life. So for the love of the American program, I'm willing to put my flag aside to try to deal with you on a man-to-man level and squash this bullshit.
Man, dude say some shit that happened 2 years ago. What about when y'all shot my motherfucking homeboy 18 times?
Man, that was on him. He
Man, I
said
say that shit to Keelan Dow all the time. How you gonna stand over?
I don't give a
Yeah, all right. That's the problem. You don't give a
Can y'all sit down and come close and talk about this shit? We teach the opposite. We don't want people to have role models. We want them to take responsibility for their own self-determination. Take responsibility for your own actions. Set your own goals and achieve your own goals at your own time. You know, we don't want to be Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan. Those are great physical human beings, but when it comes to academics, you know, they might not measure up. When it comes to fighting for freedom, equality, and justice, they might not measure up. But when it comes to being approved by the general populace, they are considered superstars. So you must find your own way and empower your own self and keep your own self-esteem up.
Well, you know, every great athlete that I've had the opportunity to talk with, two things that you've just talked about. One is you play for yourself, and you don't have to check with the fans or the score. And secondly, you don't want to have role models. But I think that you could be a good role model. I think you're a role model in a position that you're in now, and a good role model for the young people.
You didn't hear what I said.
I heard what you said.
Well, I heard what you said.
Go ahead.
You think,
Yeah.
you see, no,
Yeah.
there's no role. I'm no role model for no young people. Not with what America teaches. You know, America teaches you to be good.
Well, we look now over Los Angeles. This is where you work now. We were talking about it earlier. Tell us about what you're doing right now.
Well, first of all, this is my home, which I've been here since 1967. Love it to death. I guess the people can see the view out there, and it's quiet, and sometimes I have major parties and political parties. But I'm president of the American program, which is a program that deals with life management skills, those skills that it takes an individual to function on a day-to-day level. It deals with self-esteem. It's scientifically researched over the last 30 years, and it's not like Jim Brown going around preaching and talking about things I don't know about. It is highly technical yet simple, and it gets tremendous results because it changes the thinking of individuals, because it accepts the facts that all human beings have the same needs.
Where are you using your program? I know you're using it with the youth gangs in the city of Los Angeles. Where else has it gone to?
Well, we're in the prisons in the state of California. We're in about 3 or 4 areas in Las Vegas. In fact, we're even going to train the police there. And eventually, I hope to penetrate the high schools, the gangs, and the prisons. I think we can have a tremendous impact if we can really concentrate in those 3 areas, because they all interrelate.
I think we have the same problems in Canada in the prison systems. I mean, the fact that people who go to prison get out and come back to prison. We're beginning to get into the problem with gangs in the cities. How do these develop? What's your advice on how to stop them from going any further?
Well, first of all, you must understand that conditions that people come up under create gangs. I can't talk about Canada, but in America, the rich got richer at the expense of the poor, and the gap widened. We started dealing with the short-term gain. We didn't produce quality goods any longer. We became consumers rather than producers, and that reached right down to the bottom. The primary needs of people not being fulfilled. And if your primary needs are not fulfilled, you can't deal with your secondary needs or your social needs. So the prisons represent the fulfilling of primary needs, because you can go to prison and eat, have a place to sleep, have shelter and clothing, and even a negative social need, because you can be a homie, and you can have your homies around you, and you can be a blood and a crip, and that can make you feel good in a very negative manner. So I would say that the number one reason would be the conditions and the fact that people want to get rich, and there's no opportunity to bridge the gap for the poor. So you create a subculture, an extension from the family concept, and you have people dealing with drugs. So you have a General Motors of drugs. You know, it creates an economy. It's negative, but it allows them to function and to feed themselves, feed their children. And in some cases, a lot of them become millionaires and very powerful in a negative way.
Canada is slightly different than the United States. The United States talks about a melting pot, whether that's true or not. In Canada, we talk more about a salad. Everybody comes and they remain, you know, their uniqueness remains. What can we do to make sure we don't go the way of Los Angeles or New York in the massive juvenile problems?
Well, I perceive Canada as quite different than the United States, and I don't want to be insulting to either country, but I think we're an aggressive type of country. We like to be the leader, you know, of the world, and we develop aggressive people. But I think the commonality would be drugs. Drugs have no bounds, no boundaries. Drugs create a euphoria for people who are insecure. It also creates an economic base for a lot of people who basically cannot make it any other way. And there's a tremendous amount of money in drugs. So I think in Canada, when you talk about drugs, it's no different than the United States, because it's a major business. It's a major corporation now. And that would be the thing that I would think I would concentrate if I was in Canada. And also, you have to be concerned with the conditions of the less fortunate. And it has to be a more realistic concern. And you must go into those communities and listen to the people. The PhDs are outdated. These behaviorist scientists do not have the answer.
20 years from now, if you're not here and I'm not here, what would you like people to say about Jim Brown?
Well,
those guys out there, those kids out there.
Well, first thing they'd have to do is look at themselves, because I would want them to look at themselves. And if they feel qualified, because they're so good, to pass judgment on me, then whatever they say would be all right.
Jim Brown is as famous as he is infamous, and he admits far from squeaky clean. He says that the police think he's a big black militant and arrogant and would just love to lock him away. And the press isn't much different. But his taste for the wild lifestyle has landed him in jail, in court, and in headlines across the country. He seems to be an easier target on the street than he was on the field. But football hardly figures in his life anymore. After a stint as a broadcaster, his 1971 Hall of Fame induction, and a comeback gag to rile Steelers running back Franco Harris, Brown is letting football fade into black.